chips being imported into India, are they mostly memory chips or are they, AI inference or logic chips?
Memories, microcontrollers. Most fans today have a small microcontroller in them. Imagine the number of fans that get sold. Air conditioners are microcontrollers in them. It is across the length and breadth of active and passive components.
The importing of semiconductors for India, it's a pretty hefty bill, right? Like it runs in the billions of dollars.
There are a few that are sprouting around, but all of their supply chains are in China. Right? None of them actually build any designs in India, or rather very few do that.
ISM, the India Semiconductor Mission, how would you rate it?
It's too early to pass any judgment on it. You still need to give it a little bit more time. Manufacturing ecosystem has sprung up. Manufacturing vendors are now interested in India. Is itself a good start.
Do you think the Indian government should take equity positions in Indian semiconductor companies?
My personal opinion is
Mr. Naik, thank you for taking out the time to speak with ANI. There is a lot happening in the world of semiconductors. But before we get into it, can I just request you to take out a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you, Sanat, for having me on the show. My name is Parag Naik. I was the co-founder of Saankhya Labs, which was India's first private semiconductor company way back in 2007, 2008. We got acquired. Saankhya built a whole slew of communication products, mostly semiconductors in the areas of 5G, broadcast, and satellite communication. So we got acquired by Tejas Networks, which is a Tata company in 2022. And since then, I've been running the Silicon Broadcast and Satcom groups at Tejas Networks. That's a brief introduction. We've designed multiple chips. I've got about 50 plus international patents on some of the stuff on semiconductors and digital communications.
Right. Thank you for the introduction. So getting into it and just to set the scene, semiconductors have become this essential commodity powering nearly every aspect of modern day life, right? And in particular, semiconductor manufacturing has become top of mind conversation. If you're talking to members in government or, officials working in the tech industry. So you've been part of this industry for a very long time. So just start by telling us how has working in this industry changed, pre-COVID versus post-COVID? Because COVID really seemed like that inflection point when the whole world suddenly realized that, we need a much more diversified semiconductor supply chain.
Absolutely. I think before COVID, during COVID, before COVID, there was a market difference to the way we approach stuff, right? Or rather, the way people looked at us. Before that, we were considered a bunch of hobbyists, don't know what these guys are up to types, right? And that was the overall perception of the semiconductor industry. And it was a enterprise industry behind the scenes, not much consumer facing stuff. I mean, of course, people did use cars and phones, which and practically everything in the world runs on semiconductors and electronics today. But they never knew anything behind the hood, so to speak. What happened in COVID is the consumer began to realize that because of the just-in-time supply chains and issues of disruptions of global supply chains, there were shortages of semiconductors. I think the first one was cars, right? So people had a long waiting times to get cars because the automotive semiconductors were delayed because of supply chain issues at the fab capacity and stuff like that. And that's when the realization dawned in that to run all your cool apps on your cars or on your phones and stuff like that, you also need semiconductors. And because of the geopolitics at that time that played out, India really began to focus on semiconductors as a key and a strategic cog in our vision for the Viksit Bharat for 2047.
Right, but if you look at the world pre 2020 and then post 2020, a lot of attention has gone into this space, right? Like suddenly governments have realized that look, we definitely need a much more diversified supply chain, particularly when it comes to the foundry business, right? The manufacturing of semiconductors. But when you look at the fabulous ecosystem, not much attention has gone into that space, right? Is it because the fabulous ecosystem is pretty well diversified in itself, right? Like I think in the past you mentioned that India has, a pretty strong, fabulous semiconductor ecosystem. The United States also has a very good fabulous ecosystem. There are many companies in Europe as well that are doing really well in the fabulous design ecosystem. So why is it that not much attention given to the fabulous design ecosystem compared to the manufacturing ecosystem?
People see China's growth trajectory, right? And there has been a lot of focus on, and China grew on the back of a manufacturing base that got built up. And that manufacturing was electronic manufacturing. A lot of times people confuse between electronic manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing, right? So the thought process was that, electronic manufacturing is going to generate a lot of jobs, and therefore, potentially, the semiconductor manufacturing will also, generate a lot of jobs, and also create a strong industrial base for the country. Well, that I think was the fundamental argument, and also the strategic geopolitical reasons, right? You had a single point of failure
Mm,
in TSMC, and it's too geographically concentrated in a very small region, and the supply chain had to be diversified, and that's why you wanted to build that. From our own strategic perspective, you need to have a fab because there are areas like defense and military and space where you probably have to build your own chips, sorry, design your own chips and build them and manufacture them. And you don't want any external dependencies. But Fabless uh, wasn't as glamorous at that time, and see, you are as good as the issues that you see at that time, right?
mm,
So NVIDIA was not what NVIDIA is today. So largely, if you look at from a value creation perspective, the Fabless ecosystem generates far more value than a fab,
mm,
right?
right.
And also, on the from the fab perspective, I think the idea was you first create capacity, look at the supply side problems, and then start to go fill in the demand, right?
Mm,
That was probably the strategy that was followed, and that's the reason all the attention and fixation towards semiconductor manufacturing came about in 2020, because that was the problem at that time. But if you see since then, all the trillion-dollar companies, Nvidia, starting with Nvidia, they are all fabless companies, right?
mm,
And fundamentally, India has always thrived in design. Every other chip that is designed in the world has a Bangalore stamp on it, or maybe Hyderabad to an extent, but mostly Bangalore. So the talent to build chips, design chips exists in India. Outside of the valley, we probably Bangalore is the biggest ecosystem for VLSI engineers, VLSI IC design engineers, right? So probably it is also, in some sense, घर की मुर्गी दाल बराबर types, right? I don't know, I mean, the loose analogy, but it is already there. The
mm,
problem over even in fabless world has been that we have not been able to build local companies. There's a
mm,
lot of talent, but there hasn't been a local leader that has actually taken all of this talent together, built a product, and pushed it out. So if you look at China and if you look at even Taiwan, while TSMC started off its journey to build fabs, there was also a very strong, vibrant design ecosystem, even in Taiwan. The
mm,
MediaTeks and the Morning Stars, and there's a whole bunch of other companies that actually sprouted, and because of in parallel to TSMC, right? And I strongly believe that there's a lot of value creation that can happen in the fabless stuff. We practically import what? Minus the fab, we import about 200 or 300 billion dollars of semiconductors, chipsets, or even more, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not very good with those numbers, but thereabouts, right? So from fans to microcontroller to to air conditioners to TVs to phones, set-top boxes, televisions, what have you, cars, aircraft, everything actually needs a chip. And these chips are provided by, like you said, a far more diversified set of companies. But even there are some single points of failure. Like for example, AI, practically everybody relies on NVIDIA, but there are other companies that are trying to come up, but they're not being able to break that monopolist. So if you are able to actually go build these fabulous companies, I think there is more value we can add and also reduce our import burden by quite a lot. take the mobile phone itself, right?
Hmm.
While we have uh, taken some strides towards indigenizing manufacturing in India, not a single component still actually is Indian in that, right? We are doing value-added manufacturing, maybe some basic, I would say basic mechanical stuff and stuff like that get that. But by and large, none of the electronic components are made in India.
Right. So you mentioned that the importing of semiconductors for India, it's a pretty hefty bill, right? Like it runs in the billions of dollars. Who are, just out of curiosity, like who are the companies in India that are who are importing these semiconductors? Are they brands? Are they electronic manufacturers? Are they contract manufacturers? There's like some idea as to, what industries are the ones that are contributing towards this import bill.
All of them, right? All of them. So contract manufacturers do it for their customers. Then there are brands, car brands like Mahindra's and the Tatas and stuff like
Mm,
that. They have their own supply chain that they have to buy semiconductors. Then people who set up, who are making, EMSs for servers and stuff like that. One of the challenges in India also has been we don't have a local homegrown consumer electronic brand, right? While there are I wouldn't say that, but yeah, there are a few that are sprouting now, but all of their supply chains are in China, right? None
mm,
of them actually build any designs in India, or rather, very few do that. The uh, I would say the only uh, again limited by my knowledge or my awareness or availability bias, I would say, is Lava to an extent in the feature phone business, right? They do the entire stuff in India. They buy, for
mm,
example, from their suppliers either in Taiwan or China and stuff like that. They are the ones who buy it. So we don't have, other than them, we don't have many OEMs. I think Boat is trying to do something, but most of their,
mm.
as far as I know from public knowledge, is Chinese, right? They are trying to get a Indian component. I think they just started to get some Indian components in there. So these are the guys who buy this. The camera manufacturers, yeah, again EMS manufacturers, and a few brands. So they are the net consumers of semiconductors.
Right. And the chips being imported into India, are they mostly memory chips or are they, AI
Oh,
inference or logic chips? Like, what are the
memory.
chip categories?
It is memories, microcontrollers. I think the most is microcontrollers, right? In fact, the fan today, most fans today have a small microcontroller in them. Imagine the number
Mm,
of fans that get sold. Air conditioners are microcontrollers in them.
mm,
Uh, it is across the length and breadth of active and passive components. I think I'm not sure if we even make resistors and capacitors in India. I think there are a few, but not as many, right? So that is still bought imported. Then you've got these active components. Active components can be transistor as small as not as bad as small as transistors, MOSFETs that are used in motor controllers and in the cars and HVACs and stuff like that. Then you got microcontrollers. I spoke about it. You got memories. You got smartphone chips. You got laptop, and of course Intel and AMD for laptops, and the whole slew, right? All storage, communications, and compute, all three. And then of course there are a lot of these analog components.
mm.
People just don't know of, right? The amplifiers, small amplifiers that you need for sensing and other applications. So those are also included.
Right, right. So just switching gears. So over the last couple of years, industrial policy has been like the driving force to onshore and in some cases friendshore semiconductor manufacturing, right? And we've seen this with the $40 billion CHIPS Act in America, the $10 billion India Semiconductor Mission. So just keeping this in mind and with this backdrop, is it fair to assume that chip manufacturing cannot stand on its own 2 feet and really needs active and regular government intervention, or like framed another way, like will the drive for profits really matter when it comes to chip manufacturing if the government is regularly going to step in and just replenish the subsidy pot?
I think it depends on what each industry looks at. I think this should be looked at as a tailwind, not as a crutch, right?
Mm,
So the PLIs and DLIs are needed to kickstart the ecosystem, act as a catalyst. By itself, the government can do as much, right? It's us as entrepreneurs and the rest of the ecosystem that has to pull through. So if you look at each country's semiconductor journey, other than the US where this originated, notable being Taiwan and in Samsung, the initial seed, or rather for a large period of time, the government did provide an incubation until it became big enough. And then once it became big enough, it actually went through. They stopped depending on the government. But I still believe they still do get some subsidies, not as much as they did earlier. But these are all long cycles, right?
Mm,
You cannot celebrate or sulk because nothing happens in 2 years. Give it time, right? I mean, even the manufacturing time cycle for it to actually stabilize and start making profits is at least 5 6 years. It will happen. We have to take a 15 20 year view, right? And once you do that, then you will start to see local industries on their own start to invest in these businesses. Unfortunately, in India, what I have seen, investors typically like cash flow businesses.
mm,
It could be a negative cash flow, right? Most of our deliver stuff in 2 minutes, or I don't know what. Next, they would come up delivery in 30 seconds. Is based on is based on business model innovation. It is based on cash flows. Most of their cash flows are negative. Whereas in a business like semiconductors, the gestation period for a cash flow is very long, right? It takes 15 years, sometimes 10 years. It took us 9 years before we made any revenues in Saankhya, right? So those businesses are something that investors don't understand. And that's why the government has to step in to an
mm,
extent, right? And this is extremely strategic because if one of those 10-minute delivery or food delivery companies go down, nothing is going to happen to the country. But
mm,
Tata Motors goes down, or say Mahindra's goes down, there's a huge impact on your economy. There's an impact on, there's a secondary and tertiary impact on the economy. And these businesses are very important, right? And that's why there's a distinction between deep tech and tech now, right? Because those are tech-enabled businesses. These deep tech businesses are the foundational core of the 21st century GDP, I believe.
Right, but when it comes to manufacturing, is it realistic to believe that a startup can play an active role in chip manufacturing? I'm guessing like you do need like large industries or like large players that have pedigree in manufacturing to, get into this space, like Tata has done, right?
Absolutely,
And like
absolutely,
HCL is
absolutely.
doing now as well.
Yes, yes. It does need. See, building a fab uh, has got a lot to do more with efficiencies, with land, with construction, than with technological disruptions, right? So
Right.
while the real technological disruptions in semiconductor manufacturing come in from the tool vendors like ASML and all of that. But ASML spent $7 billion or $10 billion before they perfected the EUV
Mm,
lithography. Who has the patience in India? You tell me to spend $7 billion, but the investors in India will put $7 billion in an e-commerce company to see it through, right? It's not the
mm,
money; it's the mindset. There's enough
mm,
money out in the market, but they don't believe that those returns are consummate, right? And also, you have to look at it, in psychology, there's this availability bias. They've seen, some e-commerce companies, initially it was the IT companies that succeeded, so a lot of IT companies got funded. Then there was the e-commerce companies that came in, that they got funded. And now that there's a lot of media awareness, and the fact that we are having this interview also, is also the reason why the macro environment has changed. I believe in the coming years, they will come and invest in semiconductors as well. And it's happening. In fact,
mm,
when we raised money from Intel Capital, and I raised money from Intel Capital and General Motors, so nobody in India was
mm.
willing to even put money in us at that time, other than angels, right? So there was practically no mention of it, or and at that time it was really difficult. Now it's much more easier to raise money for semiconductors also. Not as
Mm.
easy as say some other ideas, but easier than say 10 years ago.
So just circling back to ISM, the India Semiconductor Mission, how would you rate it? Like what has worked and what hasn't worked?
Like I said, it's too early to pass any judgment on it. You still need to give it a little bit more time. I think the fact that manufacturing ecosystem has sprung up, all the semiconductor manufacturing vendors are now interested in India is itself is a good start. I think we would need to wait another 3 4 years before we want to pass a judgment on whether it was successful or not. But the only thing that I would say, in the ISM mission is the manufacturing to fabless ratio.
Hmm.
76,000 crores was granted for manufacturing. Uh, Only about 500 crores or lesser, with a ticket size of
Oh.
15 crores was for earmarked for fabless companies. That ratio should change a bit. It can never be equal, but maybe it will come closer. And I believe the DLI 2.0 that's going to get rolled out shortly, that correction might come in. So these are first baby steps. You have to understand the baby steps. TSMC was started in 1986, 85 or
Hmm.
86. It took them 20 years before the people even noticed, that okay, this company, okay, this is doing something,
Hmm.
right? And then they took off. So you have to give it time. I don't think you should pass any judgments this early.
Right. So India has like focused a lot on the mature node ecosystem, right? Can you just tell us like what are some of the use cases of these chips in the mature node range and why are they still very important?
Yeah, so most of your MOSFET transistors that get into just sold in the billions are 180 nanometer, right? RF components are most of them at 130, 180 nanometer. You've got you got analog and analog RF and all these low $2, $3, or less than $5 chips, $10 chips, mostly around
Hmm.
in the mature nodes. You got microcontrollers. Most microcontrollers which get into fans and all of them are no higher or no lower than 28,
Hmm.
40, 28, and all of that.
What about
So
telecom?
beyond, sorry.
What about telecom? Like
So
chips used in the
telecom,
telecom
yeah,
infrastructure and network?
telecom infrastructure needs a lot of components still get reused from the lower nodes, the higher nodes in this case. But the main baseband and some of the RF components in telecom probably need about 12 nanometer, 12 or 16 nanometer, right? But the volumes there are not very high. So you need to go to the lower nodes when you really need humongous chips. When you want to build a mobile phone SoC, the latest and the best 16 core AI enabled and all of that, or you want to build, say, an AI chip, then you need to go 12, 7, 6, and 5 and below. Otherwise, anything that are huge, extremely high volume, and very sensitive to power, you need to go down to very low nodes. Otherwise, microcontrollers and above and the rest of the market is enough of that market to clean up. That don't need you to go down to those lower nodes and make those kind of investments, capital investments that are required to build those nodes.
Right. In the mature node play or the mature node market, what countries is India competing with when it comes to taking a share of that market?
You mean in
Is it still like the East Asian countries or is
yes,
it the Southeast Asian countries that play a bigger role in the mature node range?
yeah, it's the East Asian countries mostly. The mature
Hmm.
nodes are all East Asian countries. In fact, the East Asian countries dominate even in the fabless world, right? They dominate your place. So all your feature phones, your set-top boxes,
Hmm.
TVs, and stuff like that all come from there. The automotive is mostly Europe. And slowly, the East Asian guys are getting there as well. But consumer electronics, mature nodes mostly is East Asia.
The funds from basically ISM 1.0 have been fully utilized, right? And MITI has held briefings that ISM 2.0 is in the works. Any suggestions for the government as to what the vision for ISM 2.0 should look like?
Yeah, like I said, earmark ensure that the manufacturing to fabless ratio that is not overtly skewed in favor of manufacturing. Right, that ratio should at least be improved. So, which means we should. I mean, if you earmark over a billion or two, I think that's already done with the RDI fund to an extent. Right, RDI
Hmm.
covers a lot of other things, but also semiconductors is one of the is one of the sectors that is prominently going to get funded by the RDI fund. So that probably you should earmark more money for the fabless companies. And and also, while patient capital is required, the other missing element in the ecosystem is a buyer, right? I would say I would call him a godfather buyer, or who's willing to see when you as a startup when you build a chip, nothing is perfect, right? There are
Hmm.
70-80% ready. So you should have a customer who's willing to be patient enough to pull that product out of you. And in our
Mm.
case, we had ISRO who did a lot of help to ensure that the product actually matures, works, and so you need also that benevolent customer, not Godfather. I would say benevolent, first user of the product. So those
Like
are
very similar to like purchase guarantees. Like would you
sorry,
say like
they need to be enabled by the government. Yeah,
right, like purchase guarantees, right? Like in America,
purchase
there was
guarantee.
this like there was a
Absolutely.
very interesting deal where America invest like the Department of Defense in America invested in MP Materials, a rare earth mining firm. And a
Right.
part of that deal was that the American government would, on a regular basis, purchase permanent magnets from MP Materials just to make sure that cash flow keeps on flowing to the company, even because commodity pricing are extremely volatile.
Absolutely. Yes, you're right. In India, we have most government procurements, technology procurements is NCNC, right? No commitment, no cost. So you have to do
Mm,
everything and then they will buy. Earlier, the earlier one was, even now it is prevalent. In the US, it's called QSQT, unlimited quantity, unlimited time or something like that, where there are some, like you rightly said, guarantees that you'll have a customer when you are ready with the technology.
right. So just a transaction, I actually, because we spoke about the US briefly. So a transaction like I wanted to get your thoughts on was the one between the US government and Intel, where the USG picked up a pretty sizable stake, I think about 10% stake in Intel. What do you make of that transaction?
I don't know. It's the times that we are living in. I think it's good and bad, right? There are pros and cons of government taking equity and pushing stuff. Uh, Frankly, I mean that's the China model, right? More or less, and
Mm,
well, the government backs stuff up. But there are pros and cons. It's not that it's one way or the other. I don't know. Then if the government takes equity in India, I mean, if you're projecting it to India, then you technically become a public sector company, right? To an extent, you become a public
right.
sector company.
Right. So
I
that
don't
was going
know.
to be
Would
my
not
follow.
would
That
they
was
be
actually
on?
going to, yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question. Like, do you think the Indian government should, given that semiconductors has become such a strategically important sector, do you think the Indian government should take equity positions in Indian semiconductor companies?
Well, like I said, there are pros and cons. I think my personal opinion is no. They should ensure that there are enough guardrails so that that
Hmm.
technology doesn't end up in foreign hands. It is used for sovereign purposes, and it stays in India, and the benefits are to an Indian customer and Indian ecosystem. If those guardrails are fairly well defined and well articulated and objective, not discrete, not left to discretion, I think the government shouldn't take in. Otherwise, getting in, I I personally feel that getting in investments from private parties then becomes a bit difficult. And then if the government does take equity, I don't know, for our the company that actually gets is in which the government is an investor, does it have to follow GFR for its procurement? Because most of the procurement that we do as startups is all discretionary, right?
Hmm.
Then you get into all those compliance issues and all of that. So that might slow down the companies, what I believe, right? Because the compliance becomes a bit more scrutinized. Well, it should be even otherwise. But what happens is most procurement that we do as startups or as private companies is to a large extent discretionary, right? That becomes a
Hmm.
challenge. I believe.
Right. So just going back to your founder days when you started Sankhya, would you have been open to the idea of, let's say, a customer of yours, which could have been the government, getting a board seat or being an equity investor in your company?
Well, at that time, I can sit back here and say whatever I want to say. Here is, but if you're desperate at that time, you take it, right? A lot of
Right.
times, yeah, in that particular situation, you don't know what you would do. In fact, yeah, I think you will. If somebody is willing to give you money and you're not getting other people to invest in the company, you would.
Hmm. Hmm.
I would. Maybe I would.
My last question to you is, just looking forward to the next decade, what excites you about this industry, given that you spent almost most of your professional life in the field of semiconductors?
Oh, I think with this the post AI boom, I would say, right after all the hype around AI goes off, I think the real innovation would start to begin in terms of low power semiconductors, especially in India, right? In India, because we've just started, recognizing this as a credible industry to invest in and to build on. I think semiconductor entrepreneurs are in for a great run in the next decade, and I believe the next, hopefully the next unicorn. Maybe I would like to. I mean, not just by valuations, but by revenues. I believe would come from the hardware industry and the allied industries, right? Either semiconductors or the or a company that sells hardware would come from India. I think there's no better time to build hardware companies than now in India.
Right. Right, Mr. Naik, thank you for speaking with ANI and having this discussion with us.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure talking to you.